The Democrats presented their plans to combat the climate crisis in Wednesday's town hall marathon, elevating the issue higher than ever before in a presidential election.
We got to start choosing science over fantasy here.
Frontrunner Joe Biden saying it's up to the United States to lead the fight.
We should be in a position where we generate support around the rest of the world, and those who don't do their part, don't participate, then in fact they face consequences.
The former vice president making this promise to a 19-year-old voter.
How can we trust you to put us, the future, over the wants of large corporations and wealthy individuals?
Because I've never done it. I've never made that choice my whole career. Simple.
In between explaining her many plans,
I've got plans. I've got a $2 trillion plan. I've got a $1 trillion plan. And
Senator Elizabeth Warren warning Democrats about getting distracted by conversations like regulating light bulbs, a reference to the Trump administration's rolling back energy efficiency rules Wednesday.
This is exactly what the fossil fuel industry hopes we're all talking about. They want to be able to stir up a lot of controversy around your light bulbs, around your straws, and around your cheeseburgers. When 70% of the pollution, of the carbon that we're throwing into the air comes from 3 industries.
Bernie Sanders' response, a bit more concise.
Would you reinstate those requirements as president?
Defending the price tag of his $16 trillion climate crisis plan, the Vermont senator arguing it's possible to also focus on other policies like Medicare for all and free college.
I have the radical idea that a sane Congress can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. We are fighting for the survival of the planet Earth, our only planet. How is this not a major priority? It must be a major priority.
Although Jay Inslee dropped out of the presidential race, the Washington governor's ideas were still present from the mouths of his former rivals.
I also want to give a shout out to Governor Jay Inslee, who did a fantastic job of bringing this issue to the fore in this campaign.
Governor Inslee, I'm stealing your line, and he said, so Donald Trump says wind turbines cause cancer, and Jay Inslee famously and with great humor said, no, they don't cause cancer, they cause jobs.
Senator Kamala Harris also saying she's willing to take a stand against Senate Republicans refusing to pass the Green New Deal.
If they fail to act as President of the United States, I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg arguing battling the climate crisis will not be easy.
This is the hardest thing we will have done, certainly in my lifetime as a country. This is on par with winning World War II, perhaps even more challenging than that.
With Hurricane Dorian now strengthened to a Category 3 storm, still bearing down on portions of the U.S. mainland, 10 of the Democratic presidential candidates spent 7 hours here at CNN tonight tackling the problems and potential solutions for our world's climate crisis, 7 hours in total. The powerful storm obviously highlights the fragile nature of the environment. I want to talk about all this, what happened here tonight. CNN political director David Chalian joins us, former Green Jobs advisor, President Obama, Van Jones, and former director of communications outreach for the Clinton campaign, Jess McIntosh. Both Van and Jess are CNN political commentators. Van, let's start with you. Who stood out to you?
Look, Elizabeth Warren is just an incredibly impressive person. She understands the stuff. She explains it better than anybody else. So, as usual, she kind of like wins the night. I was really impressed with Pete Buttigieg, and I was really impressed also with Cory Booker. I want to give Cory Booker credit for something which nobody else did. He's owned up to the fact that most of the math shows you're going to have some nuclear. Right now, you have every other Democrat saying you're going to get all this done with no fracking, no carbon, and no nuclear. The math isn't there. It's not popular in the party. He took that position on, and I thought he sold it very, very well.
Bernie Sanders was asked point blank about that and said...
Elizabeth Warren, same thing. So I thought that was interesting.
And he said also, he was honest to say, it can get safer and then hopefully safe. He even sort of understood the process by which.
And new nuclear is safer than the old nuclear. It's just not safe yet. I thought that was very interesting. I think overall, what you saw was the full range of possible policy solutions embraced by different ones. You had Bernie Sanders talking about public ownership of the utilities. You had others talking about taxes. You had Beto talking about cap and trade. You had Pete talking about cap and dividend. This was the full panoply of possible solutions, talked about seriously and at depth and at length. I thought it was an extraordinary night for CNN. I thought it was an extraordinary night for the country.
I was really, looking at the difference between the two parties today on this issue, it could not be more stark. Looking at the White House, where you've got the president either drawing or facilitating the drawing of a Sharpie on a map to extend the hurricane so he didn't have to say that he gave out bad information to the American public. Like, that's the debate that's happening around climate change on the other side. And tonight we had 10 really smart people who understand that we're in trouble and have different plans to fix it. I watched all 7 hours and I felt like maybe there's some hope here.
It is interesting, David, that there is this difference. I mean, just in terms of the budgets they're proposing. I mean, for Joe Biden, Vice President Biden is talking about I think $7 trillion dollars. You have Bernie Sanders talking about $16 trillion.
And you asked the former vice president flat out if that was aggressive enough. That he has. I remember when his plan came out. You were pretty praiseworthy of his plan, but the notion that his plan, you wouldn't call it modest in a vacuum, but compared to some others, it is more on the lower price tag side and a longer timeline side, right? And so, but Biden was sticking to his guns and saying this is completely aggressive enough. What is so interesting to me, whatever those differences are, what I thought was really interesting is how each one of them tonight sort of brought the urgency of now. There was a consistent message across the board that this can't be kicked down the road in any way whatsoever, and that they made it all a really urgent, present issue. And I will say one more thing, which is that, if Democrats are going to beat Donald Trump and win the White House, one of the key constituencies that are going to help deliver them the White House are young voters. And this issue animates young voters like nothing else in many ways. And so this was just as a pure political building block of what Democrats need to do. This was an opportunity to engage and enthuse a demographic they're going to need.
Well, they are hearing from voters. They are getting a better cross-section of America than just about anybody else in the country right now. And what they're hearing from young voters is almost exclusively climate change or gun safety. So obviously bringing that sort of energy and that kind of enthusiasm tonight makes sense if on a day-to-day basis they're being confronted by these questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was excited to see that a bunch of candidates seemed to be able to link climate change to issues that were other than the environment. Of course, the environment is a huge part of the issue. But you saw Bernie Sanders, who I struggle to give credit to sometimes because I don't love the way that he engages on gender issues, make this a repro rights issue. He actually talked about a woman's right to choose globally as an important aspect of the climate change debate.
Vice President Biden talked about it as a national security issue and a concern.
Right. Pete Buttigieg brought up redlining and the Syrian civil war and religion. I mean, these were a bunch of people who really understand the full implications of it.
And they just had Andrew. Andrew Yang was impressive. He was funny. Listen, he has a way of communicating about this stuff.
He's an interesting candidate.
He communicates about this stuff very, very well. He lands it. And he was funny. I think people don't realize the sense of humor that he brings to this stuff. That came through tonight. I think this format works really well for candidates like Yang, who actually have some depth to them. It's hard for them to get those points out sometimes at the debate stage. I thought Yang had a great night tonight. I also think, look, I love Amy Klobuchar. I know that she's not, the most charismatic, but I thought she did her homework. She was prepared, and I think she knows how to talk to Midwestern voters about this stuff in a way that seems credible and seems honest.
I just want to play, obviously, the Paris Climate Accord was front and center for many of the candidates, and pretty kind of almost universally. Let's just play some of what was said.
My first executive order that afternoon will be to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord.
Well, the first thing I would do is rejoin the Paris Accord.
I think it's critically important that we immediately, on day one, get back in the Paris Agreement.
On day one, I will bring us back into that international climate change agreement.
Day one, re-enter the Paris Climate Agreement. But I listen to people getting applause for saying I'm going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. I'm sorry, that is like a cost of entry even to run for president or talk about the presidency if you're not doing that.
Obviously, almost word for word in some cases.
Well, I think it's important, though, because that really was hard fought for the Obama administration. We got the cap and trade bill done in the House. We couldn't get it done in the Senate. Obama had to use his global leadership, and we've got the whole world to the table, and Trump just turned the table over. And I do think that for Democrats, that was the beginning of a very, very bad process. So, but I agree with Cory Booker that it is kind of like the obvious move.
I think one place where Biden had, I think it was an off night for him. He didn't seem excited to be there. He seemed pretty defensive about being questioned at all. But the one place where I thought he really shone was when he was able to talk about how he would handle being a diplomat in chief, like bringing the world together, talking about.
And he was credible on that.
Absolutely.
He called it his wheelhouse, right?
He was 100%
right. And that was one place where I was like, absolutely. Now this is the Joe Biden that I'm seeing. Where I was confused by him tonight was in the way he seemed not to relate to the audiences asking questions. Like he got, a question from a woman who had lost her daughter in Sandy, and he didn't mention that. It seemed odd for him.
I got to leave it there.